Hello all, Ken here, your Thrifty Apprentice. Happy Wednesday and welcome to the second video in the Thrifty Card Creation video series. In today's video, I will be showing you 5 cards constructed from leftover pattern paper. This pattern paper is left over from the Advent Fine Art Calendar I constructed back in December of last year for use this year during the 2024 Christmas season. All layers cardstock came from a Park Lane solid paper cardstock pack normally carried by Joann's. All cards constructed are A2 size, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Therefore, all layers have been sized to fit the card base. So let's get started. For our first card, using the leftover pattern paper strips that I was speaking of and double-sided tape, I'm adding adhesive to the back of those strips and then adhering them down to purple backing matte solid cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border. In order to offset that, I'm using an additional strip of that leftover pattern paper, backing it with purple cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border, and then a focal image cut from a flower ephemera sticker, again backing it with purple cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border. Adding adhesive to my card front, I'm going to add it to my card base, and then using the additional strip, I'll add it to the top of the card front to cover where those 2 original strips of pattern paper met. Now I'm going to attach the focal image, again using double-sided tape, and I did use my sentiment to make sure that I could gauge where it should go. I left it about 1/4 of an inch from the side of the card. I'm going to add adhesive to the back of my sentiment and then add it directly in the middle of that panel I used to cover where the 2 original strips of cardstock met up. Needed a little more pizzazz. I grabbed my hole puncher. I placed a hole directly in the middle of the card front, right up under the sentiment, and then added a silver eyelet. I really like the way that it looked and the weight that it added to the card. Next, I'm going to adhere pink rhinestones with a little extra adhesive to make sure that they stick well. I thought it added a little pizzazz, and I did decide to create 2 cards along this card design. For card 2, I will be using 2 strips of pattern paper left over from a different pattern paper pack. I'm going to add adhesive to the back of those 2 strips, and then I am placing them down onto solid gold cardstock as the backing mat. I will place them down to leave 1/8 of an inch border on all 4 sides. In doing this, I did leave a gap down the middle of the original pattern papers because they were not big enough to meet in the middle. In order to rectify this, I took solid black cardstock about 1 inch wide, cut it to fit my card front, backed it with gold solid cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border, and then placed it down to cover that gap in the original pattern paper. Next, working on the focal image, I took an additional piece of scrap pattern paper, cut it into a tag, backed it with gold solid cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border on all sides. I decided to add a clear ephemera sticker, which I felt looked really good on top of the writing in the background. Added a gold eyelet to the top of the card to give it a little bit more pizzazz, added adhesive to the back of my focal image, and then attached it to my card front in the position I wanted it to be. Next, I'm adding adhesive to the back of my card front and then attaching it to the card base, again leaving 1/8 of an inch border on all 4 sides. Next, I'm going to take some black hearts that I cut from the same black solid pattern paper or cardstock to cover the gap, and I'm going to adhere them to the far left side of the card. I really love the way that this one turned out, and again, I created 2 cards along this design. For card 3, I'll be doing it just a bit different. I'm taking the cut off leftover strips of pattern paper, adding adhesive and actually attaching them directly to the card base, meeting in the middle and leaving 1/8 of an inch border on all 4 sides. Using an additional scrap of pattern paper from the exact same pattern pack, I backed it with white cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border. Then using my double-sided tape, I attached it to the card itself at a diagonal, flipping it over and cutting off any excess hanging over paper so that it would be square with the card. Next, I'm adding a solid white circle cut in a scallop shape using my brother's scan and cut with white solid cardstock. And then I'm going to add a 3D butterfly sticker that I picked up from the Dollar Tree. Really economical. To finish the card off, I decided to add 4 blue diamond-shaped rhinestones, 2 in the very top far right corner, and then I'm adding 2 in the very bottom left corner. I cannot get away from using butterflies in my card and journal designs. I really love them, and I think they add a lot of elegance to anything that you happen to make, and everybody loves butterflies. So that's that one, and I did make 2 cards on this design. For card 4, I'm once again using leftover pattern paper strips. I'm going to add adhesive to them, and then I'm attaching them to matting paper that I made from white cardstock dyed with yellow watercolor, splattered with mass tone red watercolor. Gave it time to dry, cut it down to use it as my backing mat. I attached my 2 strips, letting them meet in the middle, leaving 1/8 of an inch border on all sides. In order to cover the seam like I've been doing on all other cards, I'm using the same exact pattern paper strip, except the opposite side, attached it to yellow cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border. For the focal image, I took a rose ephemera sticker, placed it in the middle of solid white cardstock, backed it with pink cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border. I then attached my card front to my card base with my double-sided tape. I attached my top panel to the card front, covering the seam in the middle, and then I attached the focal image to my card front towards the bottom right-hand corner of the card. Next, to add the sentiment, I simply took pre-made sentiments that I had in my stash, backed it with purple cardstock, cut it down to leave 1/16 of an inch border on the top, bottom, and left-hand side. And for the right-hand side, I simply cut it in a diagonal. Added adhesive, and I'm placing that sentiment in the top left-hand corner of my card design. To finish everything up, adding rhinestones once again, I'm going to be adding 1 in the top right-hand corner of the card, and then I'm going to be adding 1 in the bottom left-hand corner of the card. Really like the way this one turned out. Really using up this leftover pattern paper, and I did create 2 cards along this card design. For my final card, it's actually pretty simple and straightforward. I don't have leftover strips, but I am still using leftover pattern paper. So, with a white card base, I'm going to be attaching my backing panel matting, which is solid green cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border all around. Next, attaching my backing panel to its matting, I'm going to once again leave 1/8 of an inch border all the way around, which now attaches the card front to the card base completely. Now for my focal image, which is just another leftover piece of pattern paper. I'm going to attach it to green cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border. Now, I don't always get it right the first time, and when I don't get it right, I do it again and again until I do. So it did take me a few tries to get that focal panel centered, but eventually I got it, and then I used double-sided tape to attach the focal image to the entire card, more so towards the top middle. Once that was down, I took a solid piece of green cardstock, cut it into a ribbon, and added it directly down the middle of the focal image. And then I added my sentiment, which has been backed with purple cardstock, leaving 1/8 of an inch border. And I did create 3 cards on that design. To finish everything up, I am going to be adding pockets to the inside of certain cards. I do this for a couple of reasons. One, so that the card can be used as either a gift card holder or a money holder, or two, so that the card can be regifted. You can simply write whatever you want to say to the recipient on a separate piece of pattern paper, or a separate piece of paper, stick it in the card so they can remove it and regift if need be. That's going to pretty much bring us to the end of this second video. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Check the video description for all relevant links. And remember, as I tell you guys at the end of every single video, just keep painting and crafting.